So I've gone back and forth about weighing in on the whole UTMB situation, mainly because I think others have already covered it extremely well. I'd urge you to watch Jeff Peltier's video or listen to Gary Robbins' talk on the Free Trail podcast for a much more in-depth and boots on the ground look at the situation. And so ultimately I didn't think my input was needed. But then came the announcement of the World Trail Majors, which I wanted to talk about, as I'm not completely sold on the idea, and I thought I couldn't talk about one without mentioning the other. Plus, as of the day of scripting this, UTMB have just fired Corinne Malcolm from her commentary role, which is another terrible decision by UTMB, as Corinne is one of the most authentic voices in our sport, and has worked so hard to improve the UTMB coverage, particularly when it comes to equal coverage of the women's race. I'd recommend this episode of the Trail Society podcast if you want to hear more about that battle. Anyway, here we go. This is the UTMB situation and the formation of the World Trail Majors. Let's jump into it. So first, a brief and simplified overview of the controversy, in case you've been living under a rock for the last couple of months. Whistler Alpine Meadows, or WAM, was a 100-miler in Canada operated by an independent local race organisation co-founded by ultra-running legend Gary Robbins. I say was because after a few successful years, they were unable to put on the race this year due to permitting problems with Vail Resorts, who own the Whistler resort that the race operates in. Nothing had changed since the previous successful application, but this time Gary and his team were dealing with poor communication from the start and a reluctance to approve his race, for seemingly no reason, until eventually Gary had to make the tough decision to pull the plug and cancel the race. Then, at the end of October, all was revealed. UTMB announced their latest World Series race, Ultra Trail Whistler by UTMB, a race taking place on the same trails with a similar route at the same time of year as WAM. It was undeniably a case of a corporate international company stealing from a local independent one, and it was a move that rightly outraged the ultra running community. Let me be clear, this wasn't the case of a race struggling to continue and UTMB stepping in to save the day, or an events company that was looking to sell off a race. This was straight up bullying their way into a region that didn't need or ask for a UTMB race. I could spend a while ranting about this, but as I said before, others have already covered in detail why this is a bad move for UTMB and a worrying one for the sport. All of this has left many contemplating their future involvement in any UTMB races, with even Jim Walmsley making a comment on his potential return. And to be honest, I'm pretty torn. As a fan of the sport, which is what this channel mainly focuses on, UTMB puts together one of the biggest and most competitive elite fields, and I think that will continue, as so many professional contracts will include performance bonuses for UTMB, plus it's super iconic and the event draws more attention than any other, at least in Europe, meaning that a top 10 at UTMB is still going to mean a lot and can make a huge difference in a pro's career. So I can't begrudge anyone who lines up next August, and it'll be hard not to get excited about and enjoy seeing the best go to battle. As a participant, UTMB was never that high on my list anyway. The experience the mid-pack runners get is vastly different to the elites, with long queues at every pinch point or gate, overcrowded aid stations that have been known to run out, and the cost of entry, which includes racing World Series events to qualify and then travelling to Chamonix for UTMB itself. Again, I wouldn't judge anyone who still wants to take part in such an iconic event, and if you're already a couple years into the journey of earning stones and trying to qualify, then absolutely continue, and don't let greedy race owners like the Ironman Group ruin that for you. All I'd say is that if you haven't started that journey, maybe consider supporting smaller race organisations or local ones that do a lot more for their community and really value every runner who toes the line. So all of that brings me on to the announcement of the World Trail Majors, a 9-race series comprising of independently owned events from all corners of the world. This announcement came just 2 weeks later, and according to anyone involved, was not a response to the UTMB controversy, which I find hard to believe. Now, I don't doubt that they were working on this for a long time before, but the announcement definitely seems rushed considering some of the question marks around how the series will work. Now, that's not to say I'm not excited by the announcement. I love a race series. In fact, the Golden Trail series, which features some of the best sub-ultra races and runners on the planet, is amazing. And in a video I made earlier this year covering the Golden Trail series, I mentioned that I'd love to see a highly competitive series for ultra distances. But as I said in the intro, I'm not completely sold on the idea, and I have a couple of issues with what we know so far, so let's talk about it. Firstly, the name. I know it's not a huge deal, but it's hard to get behind calling these majors, when races like Western States, Hard Rock, and for all its faults, UTMB, are not included. The races on the list are fantastic, don't get me wrong, but if anything, I think it's confusing for newcomers in our sport. Imagine a road runner, familiar with the World Marathon Majors being the biggest events in their sport, coming into trail and being told, oh yeah, we have the World Trail Majors, but Western States isn't one of them, and that's probably the biggest race in the sport. Either that or UTMB, which also isn't a major by the way. It's a small nitpick, I know, but I'd rather the majors were the biggest races in the sport, which these aren't. Moving on to how the series will work, and please correct me if I get any of this wrong. Currently, we know that there'll be 9 events, and that an athlete's best 2 results will be combined to give them an overall ranking. Then there'll be monetary prizes for the winner, and I imagine the podium sitters, but I haven't heard how far that will go down, or any details on the amounts. I also can't seem to find if all races will be ranked evenly, or if the amount of points on offer will be weighted based on difficulty. I know the long-term goal is probably to elevate the stature of the races involved to the point that all 9 are competitive, but currently a top 10 at the crazy competitive Black Canyon 100k is far more impressive than a top 10 at the South Downs Way here in the UK. So should say 7th at both score you the same amount of points? Circling back to my point earlier, if they'd taken a couple extra months, all of this could have been worked out before the announcement. If I was a pro right now, trying to plan for my 2024 season, I'd be pretty confused as to which races to pick. And on that, the first race in the series is in a month's time and the overall prize purse has still not been announced. Are we really expecting elites to go all in on this without knowing what's up for grabs? Plus, unless that money on offer is pretty substantial, is it really a viable alternative to races like UTMB, where although prize money is minimal, the sponsor bonuses and career opportunities that come from a top 10 there are probably pretty substantial. I would have loved to see something more on offer from this series. The obvious call would be something like Western States tickets to the overall top 2 or 3 men and women. Perhaps making it a best 4 results and therefore offering a route into Western States for athletes who are consistent performers rather than race winners. Another option, I think first suggested by Corinne Malcolm on Twitter, would be for the series to be used as national team selection for the World Trail Running Championships, which is probably my favourite idea of all of these. Then another one I had would be to embrace being more of a feeder series, get a title sponsor on board and offer professional contracts to the overall winners, therefore attracting the best young prospects and unsigned shredders in the sport. I'm no race director though, and I'm sure these would be pretty hard to implement. I just think something more should be in play than just money. Final negative point is that I just don't see what this offers for the rest of us, the non-elite. The races in this series are already brilliant, and if I was travelling to the US, I'd want to do an Aeroviper race anyway. In the UK, Centurion races like the South Downs Way are high up on most British runners' lists. I have my eye on their Autumn 100 race, so does this now mean I should shift focus to the South Downs Way? I could literally go through all of these and say that if I was travelling to that part of the world, these races would be near the top of my list already. To counter that, not everyone knows where to start when looking for a destination race, so perhaps if you've done one of these in your own country and had a great time, you can be confident that another race in this series has similar values, and that might make picking races abroad easier. Again, I would love to see an additional benefit to completing multiple events in the series, perhaps a lottery multiplier for races like Western States or Hard Rock, or if the races in this series start to become oversubscribed, then at the very least a multiplier to the lottery of another race within the series, based on how many you've done. Or perhaps a grand prize, even just a medal like the World Marathon Major's 6-star medal for completing them all. Although at the same time, environmentally and economically, we probably shouldn't be encouraging people to travel all over the world, spending thousands, just to complete this series. So yeah, I'm not completely sure what the average runner gains from taking part in this series. Now to end on some positives, I do think this could be a great addition to the sport, especially for those of us who love to see the best runners racing regularly, as some of these races fall at pretty good points in the year where top athletes could squeeze another race in, especially if they'd already ran something like Black Canyon earlier in the year for a golden ticket. At that point, why not just take part in the series? Next, I can't imagine they haven't set out a plan for all these races to get great coverage, especially with someone like Jamil Curry involved. So that's more racing to watch, with potentially more top athletes and an overall standing to play for, meaning when we all tune in for Ultra Trail Cape Town next year, which is the last stop of the series, there'll be plenty of movement on the overall leaderboard to keep an eye on. And when following a race for 20 plus hours, the more storylines to talk about and get excited about, the better. Ultimately, I do think the World Trail Majors are a good thing. I'm excited to see them play out next year, and I'm definitely going to be covering them on this channel. I just wish some of the kinks had been ironed out a little bit more before the announcement, as if pros aren't sold on the idea yet, the hype around it could fizzle out in this first year. Anyway, let me know what you think in the comments below. Does this increase your interest in these races or make you want to take part? And let me know your opinions on the UTMB situation as well. Thank you so much for watching. Remember to like and subscribe. I'll be back soon with more ultra running content. Cheers.